Hello, I'm Jordan Peterson, the artistic director for the Philadelphia Classical Guitar Society, and the Society is honored to welcome Duo Silvio to the Athenaeum on Friday, January 9th, and Settlement Music School on Sunday, January 11th. Duo Silvio is comprised of lutenist Richard Stone and Cameron Welke. Along with works from Bach and Weiss, audiences will be treated to works by John Johnson, Don Milano, William Byrd, and Diego Ortiz, among others. Here today to talk about the program is Richard Stone and Cameron Welke. Richard, Cameron, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks very much.
Okay, first things first. Tell me about a little bit about the duo. Both your entree into lute, your oeuvre and albums, and a bit about your instruments.
Sure. We are a de facto pandemic project. We started off not being a pandemic project, but then we turned into a pandemic project because it was wasn't it? Do I have this right, Cameron? It was in the year that we were in person at Peabody, and then we got cut off that winter. And so we had to work.
Yes, so we premiered in 2019. Fall of 2019 was our first live performance, and that quickly turned into no live performances for a few years. Um, yeah, so the project's been around since 2019. I've been a lute player. I had not been a lute player for long when the project began. I did my classical guitar degree, my undergraduate classical guitar degree at Belmont University in Nashville, and happens to get placed into the studio of a guy named Francis Perry, who also happens to be the only lute player in town. If anybody watching this has any connections with early Music City, you may have run into Francis. And when I was popping around looking for master's programs, I wasn't thinking to apply as a lute player, but I always mentioned that I played. And when Peabody saw that on my application, Mark Sudek, who was the head of the historical performance department at the time, reached out and wined and dined me into coming and studying to get a lute and theorbo degree. Um, so I was Richard's student when the duo formed. Just sort of cutting my teeth on all sorts of Weiss music and learning continuo. Richard would come down to Baltimore for one day a week because he lives in Philadelphia, and we'd be together for something like 8 hours that one day a week, just back-to-back lessons and coachings and all that sort of stuff.
And cheese
Um,
eating.
and lots of cheese eating. Yes, that was a very important part of the experience. Um, and we'll talk about this probably at the end on our coming up, but we don't have any recordings released yet, but we have got in the can our first recording, which is a CD of the reconstructions of the Weiss duets, which is our core repertoire. Richard has been working on these Weiss duets. Um, I hope it's okay to say for about as long as I've been alive. Um, and so that particular repertoire was the whole impetus for the duo beginning in the first place. Was Richard looking for a duo partner to finally get to finish and perform these reconstructions that he's had bouncing around for many years.
So, Richard, could you expound on the reproduction or reconstructions rather of the what I see you're playing the a Weiss duet in D that you reconstructed? It's attributed to you. Can you expound on your process for these reconstructions?
Sure. Let me just sort of back up a little bit, which was these duets were part of a much larger reconstruction project that included Weiss's then extant surviving ensemble music. And so there were 4 concertos that I reconstructed and a couple of duets with flute. And we recorded those with my group Tempesta di Mare for Chandos, and it was my group's launch. But so the when my group launched, the duets aspect of the reconstruction project got sidelined, and it really wasn't until Peabody in 2019 that I thought, oh yeah, we can do this. But that's not the process. That's just the well, it is process, but it's chronology. Um, yeah, the thing about reconstructing this music is that the lute parts that survive, with the exception of passages, and it's the same for the concertos, the except for the passages where there are like 7 bars of rest or 18 bars of rest, um, it's it's basically like being an art restorer. And I like to use this analogy because it's easy for people to relate to when you have, let's say you discover in a Greek sculpture from antiquity, but it had been damaged. And the parts that are missing, let's say a nose, a wrist, and a hand that's connected to it, are gone. Nobody knows where they are. So you can make a believable stand-in. That's kind of what you aim for, and for the real thing, because nobody knows what the real thing is like. And you draw on your knowledge of that time in Greek sculpture, what people were producing then, and also on your knowledge of anatomy. And so there's certain details you won't know, like is this person holding what is the angle of the wrist? What are the fingers expressing? We'll never know. There are certain maybe clues if the musculature of the forearm is showing, oh, that appears to be flexed. We might assume the fingers are curved in.
And
So
important, I think, to clarify too that for both the concerti that you first reconstructed and these duets, these are ensemble pieces that there is one complete lute part that survives from all of them. So the concerti were just the solo lute part that the orchestral parts were reconstructed around. And for the duets, it was one of the 2 lute parts survived. And so an entire second lute part had to be reconstructed for each duet.
that's correct. That's correct. But luckily, the surviving lute parts come with enough information that you can work with that if you switch these Greek sculpture things over into musical analogies, or no, musical realities. The Greek sculpture thing was an analogy. So the if you think of anatomy as your knowledge of Baroque structure, and then knowing Weiss's style and the style of his milieu as knowing how people were sculpting in the day, that kind of gives you your your basis on which to begin work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So your foundation is really your past previous knowledge, both of composition and familiarity of Weiss, as well as maybe the setting. Yeah, you tie it all together. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know the instrumental music of the court where he worked too. So Zelenka and Hasse and Veracini and other composers who worked at Dresden, mostly writing orchestral music and opera, but still, it gives you an idea.
So I guess I always find myself more invested in works when I know a little bit of the background. Um, who composed it, why, what was happening in the world during that composition. If they were big cheese advocates and they had cheese lying around and how that factored into the composition, maybe cheese delirium there. And what, if anything, was the composer trying to convey in the piece? So, can you give me a little bit of insight around some of the works you're performing, almost in tandem to your reconstructions? How does that background and environment really factor into how you perform?
Well, if you, I think the thing that's the most interesting story out of all of this that's in the record is in the summer of 1739, Weiss went to the Bach household, stayed in Leipzig for a month or so. And Leipzig, like Dresden, where the court was, where Weiss worked, they're both in Saxony. They're in the same region of German. It's the same regional dialect that people speak there. And he went to visit Bach, and I think that the piece that we're playing, which goes by the BWV number of 1025, but that people know as, if lute players know, and guitarists who transcribe it, as Weiss Sonata 47. I think that, and I'm just guessing, it's just a fantasy, but I like to think that that's that part, the extra part that Bach composed as an overlay to this lute sonata came out of the improvisation that Bach's nephew reported going on there for days and days on end of Bach and Weiss playing fugues for each other and just improvising together. One of the movements that we're playing, the courant, if you play it as a lute solo, to my ears, it has holes in it. And it's the same with the finale that seems to have holes in it. And so I can't say definitively that it was conceived of as an ensemble piece, but I like to think, in the movie in my mind, I like to think that it's actually a product of improvisation together, of Bach and Weiss improvising together. And that the part that the obligato that Bach composed was his contribution to a joint project.
Oh, wow. Absolutely. That, yeah, that strikes me. Having those influences or that story, even like you said, the theater of the mind, um, having context really adds to the piece or the work, whatever you're performing. Um, Sort of reminds me of Charles Ives and how he was influenced by the world around him, how Emerson would come visit him and they would have artists stay at their house, and there's always someone on clunking away on the piano, and would incorporate that into his composition. So he was influenced by the world around him, and you can hear the world around him in his works. And that adds another layer of understanding as a listener, I feel, at least when I'm listening to the Concord Sonata, the context around it. It's just not a bunch of noisy notes. There's meaning and a story, a fable around it. So it feels like that's what you're sort of getting at, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, you don't know what was exactly was going through his mind.
Oh yeah, exactly.
But you know that there's definitely a there.
I couldn't help but notice the snarkiness baked into the duo's website. This seems like a departure from the stereotypical stodgy period instrument or stodgy classical performer reputation. Do you feel like we're shedding that skin of our curmudgeonly predecessors and that there's sort of like a new attitude being adopted by today's classical musicians as well as the audience?
I think we're an interesting ensemble to ask that to, since we are a pretty starkly multi-generational ensemble. You know, Richard was literally my teacher, and I sometimes lovingly call him my curmudgeonly predecessor. So we certainly come from very different, or we come with a lot of different type of background. Richard comes to this project with a lot more background than I do in this world, and so I think that we have slightly different perspectives on how we approach it. Um, you know, for me at least, this is something that I really love to do, but it's definitely not the only thing that I love to do. And so it's hard for me to do it if I have to take it incredibly seriously. So at least for me personally, I know that it's very important to have an amount of levity to just make sure that I'm actually having fun with what it is that I'm doing. So when I'm writing a bio or something, if I can put something in there that makes me laugh a little bit, that's usually a good sign to me. Um, and expanding over to then how we do our performances, again, I certainly have a big preference for approaching the audience on their own level for when it comes to interactions, to making the concert experience, depending a little bit on the space that we're in. You know, if we're in a big, huge space, it's just the distance, the physical distance between the audience becomes a little harder to overcome. But when we have the chance to, making it really feel like we're just sitting in a living room playing music for some friends, which is partially just an atmosphere that I enjoy, and concurrently, I think is appropriate because that's, of course, the environment in which a lot of lute music and Baroque chamber music was being performed during its day. Um, so are we shedding stodginess as a big, large, overarching trend? It's a little hard to say. You know, as lute players, we're pretty far outside the pale of sort of the mainstream classical music world. But I know that I do this project because I enjoy what it is that we get to do, and I want to make sure that enjoyment um, is an experience that's at the forefront, both for us and the people that we're sharing our music with.
So I guess with that, expounding on that, I always go back to the viewpoint of, say, Milton Babbitt, where this is highly academic and the audiences must be learned and this is for them. Do you feel like this there's like a barrier to entry for audiences, or could anyone listen to what you're performing?
Um, I I think this is a very personal opinion. I think that anyone could come in and listen to what we're performing. I don't think that what we're performing is for everyone. I'm personally not of the belief that everyone has the capacity in them to enjoy any kind of music. Um, you know, there's certain kinds of music that I've tried multiple times to really get myself into, and it just kind of keeps feeling like it's pushing me away. And to me, that's fine. So in terms of the actual entry for a performance, I do think that there are, and this might connect with a question that you have later about venues. Again, if we're playing in a big concert hall, in a big concert hall type setting, that does feel like a little bit more of a barrier to entry because we don't have that intimacy with the audience where it's really easy to again, approach them on their own level and share what it is that we're doing, and really conversationally share like the stories of the music and the instrument and try to connect it with things that they might be able to relate to in their own lives. Um, but I don't think, yeah, I think certainly musically, anyone, there's no barrier to entry musically. I think it's just whether or not you like this particular music. And that's a discovery that each audience member gets to make for themselves as they come to our concerts.
Yeah, I guess let's get into the concert itself. So you're performing at two venues with different vibes, you know, like the kids say. The Athenaeum is intimate and studious, you know, very you're going to feel like you're in a court with two lutes playing for you. Whereas settlement is more open and your typical performing stage. So there's a definite separation between artists and audience. So do you take these the venues and audiences into account when you build your program? It sounds like you do. And does that atmosphere affect your performance, or even like you already wax poetic a little bit on it? Just the relationship with the audience during that time in that specific space.
What's this
Uh,
question for?
I think it was for you. I do have one quick thing to say, which is so I will say I would say the venues and audience, we don't take the venues and audiences into account when we are building our program. Sort of our repertoire selection process and
Mhm.
how we structure our programs, I think is pretty consistent regardless of where we're playing. Part of that is there's not like a massive variety, I would say, in the kinds of venues that we play in. You know, we go all the way down from house shows up to we start to feel a little out of our element in anything above a medium-sized hall, or at least the nature of the performance has to change because then we have to look into sound reinforcement, which is great and I'm all for, but it just changes the atmosphere of the performance in some way. Um, but how we build the program is not really affected by where we're playing. How we approach the performance, I'll let Richard chat about. I think that definitely does change based on the venue that we're in.
We've only played in small houses. I don't think we played for more than 400 people. That would have been when we were in Lincoln, Michigan.
Lexington.
Lexington, some L word. Yes, thank you. Um, but I think all the time we like to chat from the stage with the audience, and we like to chat with the audience after the show also. So, and I think we do think of it as a show rather than as like a recital. But the intimacy is aspect is really important, partly, largely, no, partly because of sound reasons. I mean, we're playing lutes for goodness sake. They're quiet instruments, and the amplification thing is one of the places where I'm less comfortable than Cameron is in it. But you've played. I see you there on the end of my screen, so I think I'm talking to you, but I'm talking to an image of you. Um, you've played amplified instruments since you were playing guitar, pretty much, and I have no experience with it.
Yeah, I think intimacy or intimate is the operative word here. And I always like going to a concert and hearing from the performers. I love when there's a good story or there is the setting of the stage and adding that context. So it sounds like there's a lot of maybe not back and forth, but a lot of storytelling that coincides and prepares the audience for what they're about to experience, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd say that the immediacy of the storytelling varies based on the venue because the smaller the venue is, it's just questions of projection, rate of speech, all of the same things you need to think about on your instrument in terms of getting sound back to the back of a room. I think that some of the cadence of the stories and of that interaction is a big thing that I think as classical guitarists, people will definitely be able to relate to in terms of getting sound from an instrument and getting sound from your voice to different areas. And in terms of Richard's comment about sounds on lutes, it is the sort of classical guitar type stuff, but to a different degree in terms
Mm-hmm.
of that quietness of the sound. Um, and riding that balance between wanting to play in a way that brings people in and where we can be gentle and expressive with their sound, but not being so gentle, of course, that details are actually being left behind. A refrain in my lessons from Richard when I was at Peabody was to get it past the footlights, which has been a really great lesson in and both for speaking as well as for playing of
Mm-hmm.
exaggerating what it is that you're saying or playing so that it sounds too much right where you are, but 10 feet away from you, it sounds exactly the way you want it to.
Yeah, so that's my next question. My burning question is, where do I sit? If I'm in the audience, if I go to see the Philly Orchestra, I know exactly where I'm going to sit because I know where the blend I prefer lies. If I'm at a classical guitar concert, just seeing a soloist, I know where I want to sit and the blend that works for me. So with two lutes, where can one sit to get that sweet spot of blend? I never go for the first seat available right in front of the artist because I feel like one uh one performer takes over the other. So what are your recommendations?
It's an
I
interesting
think,
question.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
at the Athenaeum, uh, because I know both of these venues. I was at the Reyes concert, Del
Mhm.
Rey. Yeah, I was at his concert at Athenaeum. It's the first time I'd heard a concert there. I played them before, but in the library, and we're going to be in the ballroom,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So it's a bigger space than we usually play in, sort of like a medium size high Episcopal church. It's a ringy room, but the sound can become diffuse as you sit in the back. If you're just hearing one person play, it's great. If you're hearing two people play, um, then where you sit depends on where you like what you like for blend and what you like in terms of detail or watching the interaction of the two performers because the music is very conversational.
So is there another nerdy question? Is there ever, well, music nerds in the audience with a score, and does that affect your performance at all if they're reading the play-by-play as you're going along?
well, the scores for the Vice duets, at least, we are working on publishing them, but they're not published quite yet. So
Okay, there we go.
nobody has access to the full thing. But that is a good thing, and we can talk about this more in the what's coming next section. That there are scores, both for lute and also for a classical guitar duo in arrangement, that are going to be coming out. So if we ever come back to PCGS and play these duets again, we will be expecting to see quite a few scores being followed along in the
Oh, cool.
audience.
Awesome. So in the intro, I rattled off a bunch of composers. Bach and Weiss are household names, but some may not be familiar with the rest. Can you tell me how you select your composers as well as the works to perform, and tell me a little bit about the what's uh, on the docket for Friday and Sunday?
So there's a couple of different ways that we approach program selection. Again, as when the project initially started, it was the reconstructions of the Weiss duets were the core repertoire, and that was really all we performed for a few years. It's what we started with during the pandemic. We did a video concert recording of that. We've been preparing and leading up to the CD recording of those. We've really played the Weiss duets. We've done quite a lot of them. And so now that we have them recorded, we've actually, and a bit by bit too over the past few years, but it's especially now we've really started to give ourselves some breathing room to stretch out a little bit, programming wise, because we don't have that need to really keep them in our fingers to get ready for the CD anymore. So in that situation, there's a couple of different sort of routes that we take. On this program, for example, we have one of the Vice duets, which is great because they're great pieces of music, but they're really hard. So doing all of them in a concert is pretty taxing. So just getting to pick one to do is very, very nice. Um, but then we have it's just it's the same as in classical guitar. We have a knowledge of the rep that already exists for two lutes, either two Renaissance lutes or two Baroque lutes, and then we have either a knowledge or a good idea of pieces that would work really well in transcription. And so I'd have to there's I think far more transcription and arrangement than there is music originally written for two lutes on this program. The going from the Baroque to Renaissance, that we of course again have the one bike, the one Weiss duet, and then we have the BWV 1025, which Richard has performed in a couple of different duo arrangements in the past. Because again, this is a Bach harpsichord sonata where the harpsichord part is almost a note for note transcription of a Weiss solo lute sonata. So one of us is basically playing that Weiss solo sonata, and then the other of us is playing an arrangement of the violin part with some added harmonies and bass notes over top of that. And that just kind of felt irresistible because it was, Bach and Weiss's collaboration. It just seemed like a great piece to do. Um, And then again, a lot of our arrangement ideas come from Richard because he's spent so many years reconstructing and arranging and orchestrating. If you've ever been to the Tempesta di Mare concert over the years, just so much of that is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from Richard of parsing through old manuscripts, transcribing things, reorchestrating them when he thinks they don't sound quite right. So he's really the engine behind that part of the group. So he had the idea in the Renaissance path. We have these two pieces by William Byrd, one of which is a five-part gamba consort originally, and the other of which is a keyboard piece. And he just, he knows this repertoire really well and just had the idea in his head that they would sound great on two lutes. So he puts in the legwork to arrange it. We try it out, and 9 times out of 10, he's absolutely right, and it does sound great. And we just have to do some work to, make it not horrifyingly difficult to actually play. And then the original lute duet pieces that we have on this program are the John Johnson pieces at the beginning. Those are just some kind of classic. I played those a lot when I was in graduate school, kind of classic Renaissance lute duet repertoire. And I would say that we lean more towards the arrangements just because of the flexibility it gives
Hmm.
us. There's a lot of Renaissance lute duet music out there. There's not a ton of it that I think really captures either of our imaginations in a huge way. Um, and I think there's more of the music from the Baroque and Renaissance eras that really gets, especially that gets both of us fired up. Because we have very different musical inclinations and preferences. And so part of this is also, can we find music that's going to get both of us excited to perform? And just more of that exists in other forms other than lute duo. So it's looking for the kind of stuff that gets us excited to play, and that we sort of have this hunch would work really well for two lutes if we were to flesh it out and put it in that context.
Awesome. Awesome. So, just wrapping things up, what's next for Duo Silvio, both on as a duo and individual projects? Richard, would you like to take the lead on this?
Sure. Well, we have a to-do list. We have to finish editing our CD and getting that out there, and also the edition that's going to go along with it. I mean, they're not going to be sold by the same publisher, but we want them both to be coming out around the same time. So there's that.
And again, that edition is going to be in mensural notation score. It's going to be in lute tablature score in part, and then it's also been arranged for classical guitar duo. So we're trying to get it the music of it, and the edition is again for the Weiss duet reconstructions. So we're just trying to get that repertoire available to as many pluckers as are interested in trying it out.
And
Yeah.
two of the sonatas also have flute parts.
Yes.
Flute parts.
And we've proofread the classical guitar parts, and neither of us are great classical guitarists anymore. So if we could plunk our way through it, then classical guitarists that actually know what they're doing should have a totally fine time with them.
And that'll be posted on your website when it's available, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any social media presence that we can follow you?
You can certainly follow us. Whether or not you're going to see much is another
Yeah.
question. But we do have a Facebook page and we have a YouTube page. We have some clips from our concert CD or concert video that we did for a live stream concert series a couple years ago, which was the Weiss duets, as well as a couple of solo pieces from each of us. And our website, we do our best to keep up to date with especially upcoming concerts and events and things like that.
Awesome. And Richard, I couldn't help but notice you have a couple of your axes in the background.
Oh,
Are you going to be performing it on them?
oh, and I was noticing yours in your background. Yeah, in fact, I'm practicing for our program right now. I mean, not now, but before
Yeah,
and
yeah.
after our interview. So I can't see myself. Am I holding this high enough?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the 6-course Renaissance lute that will be. Cameron actually has one by the same builder, and we'll be playing half the program on matched instruments of this sort, and then over here, this is the 13-course Baroque lute. Am I too close to the camera?
No, you're perfect.
All right. Yeah, and so this is for the Weiss and the Bach.
And for the audience, what is a course?
So a course is a string or a set of strings that's treated like one string. So if you think of like the 12-string guitar,
Hmm.
still
Or
think
the
of it as
mandolin.
6 strings while you're playing it.
Very good. And who are the luthiers?
Um,
Our
we're both
Renaissance
playing.
lutes are by Grant Tomlinson.
Yeah.
Richard's Baroque lute is by Andy Rutherford, who's a fantastic American builder. And I'll be playing a Baroque lute by Jiří Čepelák, who's a really fabulous composer from the Czech Republic. Or not composer, luthier, fabulous luthier from the Czech Republic.
Oh, awesome. And do you just go on strings by mail to get your get your courses?
There's a small company called Boston Cat Lines, run by a guy named Chris Hendrickson, just out of his house in Boston, who he
Okay.
stocks both Nile gut, and nylon strings of
Mhm.
all sorts of shapes, sizes, and gauges for those of us that have non-standard instruments and always need custom sets um, for whatever we're playing.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Richard, Cameron, thank you for your time today. I'm looking forward to your concerts. To purchase tickets to see Duo Silvio at the Athenaeum or at Settlement Music School, go to phillyguitar.org and make sure to check out duosilvio.com and have a couple of tongue-in-cheek laughs throughout the bios and the homepage. And come to the concert. I know at the Settlement there is a good chance we will have cheese post show. So enjoy loot and cheese. Thank you
Excellent.
again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.